interesting story of this man's search for his mentally retarded brother from New Jersey, and after 29 years of separation, they were reunited just a few weeks ago. It's a great story. We'll meet them both, all of it coming up right now, live on the morning show on Channel 6. Well, our next guests are both brothers who were recently reunited after being apart for 29 years. This is some story. I'd like to give you a little background of it first, and then we'll get involved with them. Tragic story of being separated since they were little boys almost, and put in mental institutions and ultimately neglected. But it's a story that has a happy ending. They were reunited just a couple of weeks ago in New Jersey. Sitting next to me is Chuck Carroll. Next to him is his brother, Bobby. Robert is 46 and Chuck is 45. They had a great reunion, spent 5 days together. It took Chuck 66 days to find his brother Bobby after their mother died. And we're going to come back and share their story with you in just a moment. So we gave you some background on this next story. Sitting next to me, Chuck Carroll and his brother, Robert Carroll, and as we said, reunited after a long, long separation. When were you put into the orphanage by your mother? At what age?
I was about 10 months and Bobby was about 1.5 years.
And she just didn't want you, is that it?
That's about the size of it.
Mm-hmm. And you were, or rather, your brother was diagnosed as being mentally retarded?
At that time?
Yes.
Yes.
And so they thought you were too?
They assumed I was.
But
they never tested you?
Not until I was 13. Then they realized that there was a mistake made.
What was it like in those days? And this was in New Jersey, wasn't it, Chuck?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What was it like being in an institution like that in the 40s and the 50s?
How were you treated, Chuck?
Obviously treated as if I wasn't normal, and knowing I was normal, knowing I was normal made it even tougher being in that kind of environment. And of course the conditions there were, we were deprived of our civil liberties. Finally, when I got out of the institution at 16, I had barely a second-grade education, and I had a tremendous handicap to overcome, that being a tremendous obstacle, and eventually educated myself to a point where I was able to get myself into the educational system and make some sense out of it.
Yes.
And of course, not having any academic background, I didn't even know how to study.
Sure.
You know, much less...
But when you were released at the age of 16, you said goodbye to your brother?
No, we were separated. I was released shortly before Bobby was released.
And you didn't know where he went?
Well, I knew at that time that he was at the Trenton State Hospital, where he was then getting shock treatments. And
you were both abused, weren't you? Physically and...
sexually abused, mentally abused, the kind of deprivation that's almost not even imaginable with people who aren't really familiar with that kind of a situation. Most people think that these institutional settings, because they're supervised by governmental personnel, that it's a safe environment. By no means is that the case. What happens after the lights go out at 12 o'clock? They turn their backs and these things go on. And I mean that metaphorically. What happens after the lights go out? What happens after they turn their backs on the kids? These places were loaded with pedophiles, people who are out there for their own sexual gain, and certainly not out
so it was,
to our welfare.
Must have been very, very rough. In any event, Bobby, where did you go when you left?
Annandale State Hospital. Then after that, they let me free.
Did they help you at the state hospital at all?
No.
No.
Did they help you find a job, Bobby?
No.
They just let you out one day and you were on your own?
Yeah.
So what'd you do?
I just got myself a job and started working for Sorrentino.
No re-entry. They don't prepare you at all. At least they didn't for us.
I think it's
there was
changed
no
a lot
preparation
since
of re-entry.
then.
There has been some changes, but a lot of changes are still needed.
So, Chuck, Your mother died last year.
Yes.
You decided you wanted to see your brother again.
Well, it got me in touch with my mortality.
Sure.
And along with her death, there was another close friend that died. And I, being now 45, I figured, Jesus, enough's enough. It was time to get a hold of this guy. And I always felt this missing link with him. There was always that something missing. And
But you didn't know where he was, you didn't know where to start.
Had no idea, and I didn't even know his date of birth, and that's really what was my greatest obstacle. At least if you have that kind of data, you have a way of getting into the system and finding someone.
Did you wonder what happened to your brother?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were both kind of aching to get together, but didn't know how to start. So what did you do?
Well, ironically, I got a solicitation in the mail from McGraw-Hill. And one of the solicitations was how to find anyone. That was the name of the book.
Months?
It took me about 66 days after I...
How did you finally reach Bobby by telephone? What was the reunion like?
Well, finally when I got an address on Bobby, I sent a telegram to that address. I figured the oldest address it could be is 2 years because he has to renew his registration at least every 2 years. So at least was now not 29 years away from his... I'm now 2 years away, if at best. And then, fortunately, the address that I sent the telegram, it was someone that knew Bobby, and then one thing led into another, and he was eventually contacted, and then finally we made a phone contact.
And he's working in a pizzeria down there in New Jersey, and he's well, obviously. It looks good.
He's doing fine.
That's terrific.
He's doing pretty
So
good.
it must have been quite an emotional moment when you two...
It was. First 10 or 15 minutes on the phone, I just couldn't even talk. It was emotionally very
So you two are
devastating.
going to stay close together now.
Unquestionably.
You know, one of those quiet little stories that you read about in the paper and you wonder, what are these two guys like? And we hope we've showed you a little bit about this form of brotherly love. We thank you so much for being with us, Chuck.
Thank you.
Bobby, thank you. Good luck. We'll be back in a moment.